Hello and welcome, Dwayne Johnson, to the DigiGov Podcast. Lovely to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Great. Well, today, listeners, we're joined by a true heavyweight of the public sector, Dwayne Johnson, with 40 years of experience, including nearly 2 decades as a chief executive and as a social care director. He knows the DNA of local government better than anyone. Now, he's leading the charge at ICS.ai to help councils move past the hype and use AI to solve a whole host of challenges, from funding to staffing, which I'm sure we'll get into. Dwayne, welcome. I'm going to start with some of your perspectives from your time within local government. As I mentioned, you spent 17 years in top local government roles, including running Sefton Council. Can you remember your first interaction with AI in the council, and what made you think AI is no longer a future luxury? Councils need this right now.
Yeah, well, can I just go back a little bit? And I am going to answer the question there on AI, but I really first became interested in digital enterprise and transformation in my early career. So I was a care assistant working in old people's homes and with disabled people. And I had one of those old BBC computers, and I started talking to people about their lives, their outcomes, what they expected, in terms of support and advice. And I produced these life histories, and I won an award with Durham County Council, with the BBC, for that work. So I first became interested in that, and as my career advanced, I did an MA in Lancaster University and focused on contact centres. And I think that's where my first experience really of AI started to emerge. And I really started to think about things that were just on the horizon, things like chatbots and some of the big webinar and things that were emerging then. And that's when I suppose, AI started to come into people's mindsets, and people started to think about it. But obviously the big transformation was in 2022, when we moved and we introduced ChatGPT and many other systems. And that's just, that's the new revolution, and that's really the big game changer. And I think for the last 4 years, and blimey, the changes, it's almost daily you're seeing some merge and some new phrase or new system, etc. Well, obviously we'll come to the risks and many of the things later. But yeah, that's when I really first thought, wow, there's some powerful tools here. And based on my experiences in social work and in local government, we can really use some of these systems effectively.
Yeah, I think that's, I guess, one of the challenges, isn't it? The speed of the rate of change is almost tough, because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and sort of adopt one tool over another, because 2 or 3 weeks later, that might no longer be the sort of leading frontier model. So there is definitely challenges there. And I guess, how have you found it in the transition? Obviously, you're working at ICS.ai now, and transitioning from the public sector, from a chief executive of a council to, I guess, a tech company is an interesting pivot. How have you sort of managed that culture change? How's that been for you?
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, I had 40 years working in the public sector and used to all of the governance, the political side of it, which was the main aspect of my day-to-day working, certainly in the last, as you said, 17 to 20 years. That was my daily interaction with members and with leaders of councils. And it's very different in the private sector. I would say very similar governance, etc. I think, you've used the word there, pivot. I think you can pivot slightly faster in the private sector. Not because I think for 1 minute the public sector or members, holding you back, but I just think the decision making can be slightly faster. And obviously and there are constraints in the private sector with funding and with other things, but often you're in a better position because you've got funding to fund new innovation, and
Yeah.
you don't have the regulation, some of the workforce challenges and some of the budget pressures that local government that has. Some of them are there, but not to the same extent that I experienced.
Yeah, definitely, and I think some of the budget pressures we're going to get into a little later on with some of the case studies that you've worked with recently. I guess from your experience, we hear a lot about the sort of hype of tech and tech hype and like a golden a magic bullet, I guess, with a lot of these AI tools. Do you think your background in public service helps protect you from falling for this tech hype trap when evaluating what AI can actually do for a local government?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the good things about, I've been working as one of the directors in ICS.ai has been, the listening and the prepared to listen to,
Yeah.
my perspective and my experience working in the public sector. And I think what the private sector needs to understand, and they do understand, I think, is there has to be, they understand the skepticism because, the public sector have seen lots of these false dawns before emerge, where we've thought there's been something that's going to be an absolute game changer and something's come along that's going to, improve outcomes and outputs for lots of people in society and citizens, etc. And that's not always been the case. And of course, there's been some case studies of things that haven't gone quite as well as some councils would have liked. But it's my experience though in working in local government. They're smaller in number because the innovation in the public sector is just incredible, and it does go at pace. But going back to, I suppose, to your question, yes, I think it has been a cultural transition for me, and I have to say I'm pleased. I'm so pleased. I've walked into the private sector and I'm having this experience because I can talk to chief executives and directors and members, and I can talk through the process, and I can be sincere, transparent, and honest about whether or not some of these products are going to change the lives of the workforce, and they're going to improve outcomes for citizens.
Yeah, definitely. And when you do speak to these council chief executives, what's the number one misconception that they have about AI that you find yourself sort of constantly correcting them on? Is there anything that always springs up? Any trends there?
Yeah, I think the biggest fear is that there are going to be mass redundancies on the back of AI. Now, that hasn't been my experience. I wouldn't describe them as redundancies. I would say that most of the savings that AI has been delivered are improvements through automation, administration, tasks that staff need to undertake. So I don't think that. I think that's their biggest fear. That along comes AI and everybody's going to be displaced, and we might talk about it later on the podcast, but I can give you examples of so many areas where I think actually a lot of the jobs that have disappeared will be replaced by new jobs because of the technology. And I think there's so many good examples out there. But that by far is the biggest fear. I think the other fear, though, which is an interesting one, is the fear of being left behind.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of councillors and chief execs and directors who are thinking, do we jump now into the AI revolution, or should we wait and see how it works in some of the other local authorities? And I think that's a bit of a dilemma, and I do understand why people are in that position.
Yeah, and is it tend to be sort of metropolitan councils that you're dealing with, or is it also borough councils that you're consulting? or is it a
Oh
mix?
no, it's every form of local government. It's Met, cities, boroughs, districts. It's
Yeah.
all it's all of them that we're dealing with. We work right across the United Kingdom. We've got we're working a lot in Scotland and Wales, particularly now,
Mm.
more so than or as much, I should say, not more so as England. And I went over to Belfast the back end of last year, and we were talking to people in Ireland about some of the solutions and systems we could support with a focus on improving outcomes for citizens, and obviously
Yeah.
the benefit realization that comes with AI.
Yeah. And well, I guess like scale is an issue across the local government system. So how can a smaller district council achieve the same AI-driven transformation as a massive metropolitan borough?
Yeah, well, I think you've just got to follow the same processes and the same dynamics, really, as you would anywhere else. I think the first thing to focus on is, what is exactly it is you're trying to deliver as an outcome.
Yep.
Most authorities would say to us, whether or not they're a district, a small borough, or a very large Met, is improved outcomes for citizens. Addressing some of the benefit pressures, addressing some of the workforce shortages. Looking at rising citizen expectations, and then obviously the complexity of regulation. So it's really focusing what is it in those terms that we're trying to deliver here,
Mm.
and which in terms of the priorities do you have in that list that I've just given there, and which do you have the greatest grip on as well? Where do you have the best understanding in terms of some of your systems that you've got already? Some of those could be legacy systems, but where is it that you want to get the maximum gains? And one of the things we might touch on this later is, where do you feel confident that the data that you've got in your system is absolutely 100% accurate,
Yeah.
and we're going to be able to work with that data, and we're confident that that data is going to expose some of the areas that we really need to transform and we need to change.
Yeah, well, we're happy to get into that now, Dwayne, if you'd like. It's a meaty topic, and obviously, like data quality is the
Yeah.
fuel for these LLMs, and council data, as you well know, is often siloed across different departments like housing, taxing, social care, etc. How do you safely and responsibly break down those silos? Like, how do you usually go about approaching this?
Yeah, well, I think there's a number of characteristics there. I think the first thing is looking at what particular systems you've got. We've got to look at the interoperability. We've got to look at, are there any integration issues? So, for example, health and adult social care, the special education needs and disability services. Are there any areas in terms of commonality in terms of education? And then I think we've got to look at the common data standards that there are across those particular areas, and then the maturity in terms of the systems, for example, in terms of the cloud and how advanced you are with some of your IT systems and developments. That's very much the first stage. I think then the
Mm.
second stage is, well, how do you actually count your data? How do you go about that? What systems do you deploy? What is the workforce that you've got to support you with that? And then what are the systems that you actually use? Are you using some of the traditional systems like Excel spreadsheets, or are you starting to use some of the AI systems that many companies have now got and marketing? And then the third element then is just then about the security aspects of data.
Mm.
How do you secure your data? What level of training and support is there for staff and the workforce? And then how, when you've got that data, how are you assuring citizens that their data isn't being used inappropriately and isn't being exploited in ways that it shouldn't be? So I think they're the four key characteristics that we would work with when we're talking to staff or we're talking to councils.
Well, you picked up a lot of big points there. I guess there was the training and skills element, the trust element, and I guess one of the chunkiest topics, and it's for front of mind for anyone working in local government is that legacy IT. So how do you integrate the sort of super modern AI systems with infrastructure that might be decades old? That must be a huge challenge when you come into work with the council.
Yeah, and it is, and I think it really then that's when I think most authorities, councils do need that digital strategy, and that's something that's not new to local government. Certainly, in my experience, it isn't. So, lots of authorities at the moment are purchasing, some really robust, some really good systems that are going to collect data, and I suppose it's. I'm assuming when we're talking to people that their strategic plan, their policy is, for the next 5 or 10 years, we've bought these products right now because this is the system that is going to tell us, for example, if it's revenue and benefits, if it's adult social care costs, if it's another type of system for housing and homelessness, that they've bought that system because it's going to deliver the information that's going to help drive their strategic programming and transformation. And then I think in terms of AI, it's then about either harnessing or it's about trying to integrate with some of those systems, or it's about extracting some of the information. And if there aren't agreements in with some of those organisations to do it, it's then about working with the councils to say, once you've got the data out of the system, well, we will use some of our AI products to interrogate, and we will use those AI products to take forward some of the AI systems that you want. And I suppose just to bring that alive, there are things like freedom of information requests. That's a real very common one. There's invoice processing, there's meeting notes and reporting of information. So they're all things, particularly, they're good examples of where AI can be used. And that can either sit entirely separately, or it can work alongside some of the existing systems that council is. But it doesn't have to be a two-tier system. It can be very much, given permissions and agreements with different organisations, they can work alongside.
Yeah, definitely. And so there is that easing administrative burden with note takers, etc., that you mentioned. And can you talk to how AI can play a genuinely sort of proactive or preventative role in social care, using your experience, obviously, as a social care director, helping councils intervene before a family or an individual hits a crisis point?
Yeah, well, I mean, Derby City Council's a great example. They have got an augmented artificial intelligence system right at the front door. It's very much agentic, which is the most common, most new version of AI digital assistant, and that's there now. It's been properly trained, using the existing workforce around responding to individuals, people who are ringing up and saying, my mum, my dad, my partner, they're socially isolated, they're feeling alone. The digital assistant can very quickly, in a gigasecond, respond to, those questions. It can explain about what's on offer, based on the information that particular council has provided. There's also some really good examples in terms of aids and adaptations, people ringing up who've got disabilities and giving information about aids and adaptations, how to how you qualify for some of those aids and adaptations, or how you can how you could think about, try to access some of those aids to help daily living. So there's so many good examples, I think, in that early intervention and prevention stage, right at the front door. And there's so many things as well now for carers as well. Helpful advice on finances, helpful advice on getting support from other carers. So I think there's lots of very good examples now in the early intervention and prevention space with that digital assistant that's agentic, and I think he'll just get so much better. I listened to Andy Bramall, the corporate director, at a presentation in Manchester, and he phoned in the digital assistant Darcy live on stage. And she was incredible, actually, in terms of responding. But it was so much better than it was 3 or 4 months ago, because it's just developed the knowledge base and the information, and it was just responding so much quicker. And if we had this conversation, I think in 2 or 3 months' time, I think they'll get, it'll be even better than it is now. And I think it'll be more advanced as well in terms of some of the things and some of the things it will be able to do. So you think about that, you put that into perspective across councils across England, with so many people ringing up for support these days and advice. To think that we can have a digital assistant that can respond and give immediate advice and guidance grounded on that information that's come from that particular council, and using only that information, I think that's a real game changer.
Yeah, definitely. And in your example there with Derby City Council, their AI front door handling, I think, over 50% of the inbound calls, cutting the waiting times in half. Can you talk a little bit to those, I guess, savings? Like, what kind of financial pressures was the AI tool able to alleviate for Derby City Council?
Yeah, well, very much. I think the first set of savings came from the customer services front of house savings, and there's no surprise there, because that's where most of the advances, I think, in this particular area have been made over the last 2 years. The second areas have been very much in terms of adult social care, in terms of corporate finances, and that's been much more about supporting information and around invoice processing against some of the finances, and against many areas in terms of using recording and other systems in Derby City. So they've been the main areas where those savings have been delivered, and the savings have been identified by Derby, or their staff co-pilot that's been used. Their AI workforce system has been very much tailored by Derby City Council using ICS bespoke systems.
Right. Well, how do you usually recommend the councils measure the ROI of AI deployment? Is it always cash saved, is it hours saved, or are there better metrics?
No, I think they're the main ones. I think obviously cash is always the one that most Section 151, corporate directors, finance directors are interested in. Are there particular areas there? And one of the things that this is, we've talked before about workforce reductions. Some of it, let's face it, we're plugging gaps. Particularly those councils that are facing massive financial savings, and where they could be looking at a Section 114, or they're in a financial precipice. These are areas where they haven't got enough workforce to be able to deliver more savings, or they haven't got workforce numbers, or they aren't able to recruit staff. Well, artificial intelligence has been proven now to be able to supplement and support those staff in those particular areas. So I think that's the one particular area. And I think the second other area, though, is the benefits realization. You look at using artificial intelligence now for report writing, for presentations, So there's all sorts of areas. And the other big one that I referenced before has been very much about producing data reports. It can, produce policy documents, strategy documents. It obviously needs a human in the loop all of the time for
Yep.
those particular areas, but it can do it in so much speed. It's just incredible, really. So it's a real tool that staff are telling us, the workforce are telling us, is very effective.
Yeah, so you spoke there about always having a human in the loop for some tasks. I mean, how do we draw that hard line between tasks that AI should definitely do, so sort of routine queries, processing data, etc., and then the ones that humans should always do, like making a decision around care? How do we get
Yeah,
that right?
yeah. I think we have. There's got to be a red line, particularly around children, adults, safeguarding issues. Some of the really complex homelessness
Mm.
cases. There has to be a red line here, where I think it's all right. Perhaps at some stage, the very first stage, there's some, I think, routine information that AI could assist with, but at the end of the day, a person does need to hear that call. If nothing else, they need to be interrogating some of the information. There's that curiosity side of things that are really important. So they're the big three, I think. And I think in Derby City's case, even those are areas that I'm sure they would say there's red lines, but I think they would go further than that by saying in almost all the cases and the systems we're using around AI, where humans are contacting the council, we're still checking just to make sure that
Mm.
the AI system is responding in the way that it should. But you think about agentic and what it can do now. It can understand sarcasm, it can understand humor, it can understand when people are getting annoyed,
Mm.
it can understand rage, those sorts of things. So there's some really good examples of where that's been used effectively. And I think it's not just Derby now. Bristol Council, Cheshire East are just moving towards a similar type of product. We've got Renfrewshire Council
Yep.
who are using that. They've just won some awards as well up in Scotland for their AI system. So, AI is able to understand a lot of the frustrations and immediately be able to pick that up and be able to pass that on to a human.
Yeah, definitely. It's a tough one when you start getting into the realm of agentic AI and using those AI agents. There was an example, I think, a few months ago of AI agent booking a plane ticket on your behalf and ticking the T's and C's for you. Like in when using an AI agent, who is ultimately accountable if an AI tool makes a decision?
It's human. It has to be. And I think when any organization at the end of the day is looking at deploying these systems, you've always got to have confidence. Not just obviously there's a provider vendor responsibility here to make
Mm.
sure that there's clear transparency, that the systems work. And that's why, when they're deployed, before there's a live testing, they're always tested behind the scenes, and there's got
Yep.
to be a clear procurement and contractual agreement between vendor, supplier, and the council. But at the end of the day, once the council has signed up and those systems are in place, it's going to be the human that's going to it's going to be continue to be the main responsible. And I think that's why, just going back at the beginning when we were chatting and we were talking about the phases that you go through whenever you're looking at artificial intelligence, they're the
Mm.
sort of discussions that are commonplace in councils.
Yeah, and you mentioned there as well, Renfrewshire Council up in Scotland. They had a satisfaction improvement of, I think, from 43% to 70% in one of your case studies. Can you talk us through how they got there? What was the lay of the land like when you arrived, and then I guess when you left, what were the changes they made?
Well, I think there's a number of different characteristics there. I think there's no doubt that Renfrewshire, like most councils in Scotland and the rest of the UK, were under significant pressure. Lots of rising citizens' expectations, lots of calls coming into the council about numerous areas trying to keep up with the pace, the numbers, the volume of calls. I think was a real challenge for all authorities and for Renfrewshire. And then I think the other side of it really is how long from calling. How long you're having to wait before somebody responds. Well, obviously with an AI in place, you can pick up as many calls as it can, and it can do that within seconds. So the speed of response was so much better, and people, the surveys that they did showed that the quality of the response was really good. And I think the thing that was also a change in Scotland was the translation. So some of the translation services that that the company's able to offer, that could be Polish, and it could be Arabic, it can be any. I think is really important. And then there's the linguistic side of it. Let's face it, we all come from different parts of the UK and all speak with slightly different local accents. And I think having that Scottish accent, I think, it's an enhanced quality area. I think that the company offers.
Yeah, that's really smart. Has there been any things that are surprising or unexpected in some of the success stories that you witnessed since helping councils adopt AI?
I think the biggest surprise, if I'm being honest, and I see this now all of the time with the company. We go out and support so many councils. We get out and about at least, and I'm seeing hundreds of staff in each council, about at least one a month. The biggest surprise, I have to say, has been the engagement from the workforce. Right. I thought there would be lots of trepidation, lots of real concerns about AI, and there have been some concerns. But I think once you say to people honestly that let's do some myth busting here. AI isn't going to do this. It's not going to do that. I think people feel more reassured, relaxed, and then just the engagement, the level of engagement that there has been. I mean, we've just been with Bury and Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire councils, and we met their staff, and they were an absolute credit to those councils. They were so engaged in the discussions around AI, and they were coming up with some amazing ideas about how AI could be deployed, how they could use it. So I think that's been a real surprise in a way, because much of what we read in some areas of the media is about the big concerns that there are, and quite rightly. I was saying before about some of the risks, and so I mentioned cyber, but some of the other areas are things like the ethics, and they are genuine issues that are picked up by the media that we really do have to have conversations about. As we move forward, and the other thing as well is there's almost an AI arms race there internationally, isn't there? And we've just been looking at some of the latest robots, the smart glasses, that are being used in America and Japan. We went over to America. We've been over to Dubai. And, just the Chinese, what they're doing now is just absolutely incredible. I heard about the Chinese car show 2026 2 weeks ago. And, the chief exec of one of the big companies saying, we're not keeping up. basically. So, but we've got to, we've got to be, we do our best in the UK to keep up, and some of the innovations we've been talking about are really good. But at the same time, we've constantly got to be thinking about some of the ethical side of these issues.
Definitely, there's the big talk about at the moment about sovereign AI and sort of bringing that in house. But these innovations, does it make you excited about the future, Dwayne?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've actually got. I know we're on a podcast, but I've got the smart glasses here, and I was
It's a bit
just.
of show and
I was
tell.
just yeah, there we go.
Are
Now
these the
these
Meta
look,
smart glasses?
yeah, and honestly, you just tap the side, it brings up everything. They are just. I mean, they're a bit goofy at the moment, but the Americans reckon that they'll be good as your Ray-Bans that we all wear, of course.
Well,
Not,
yeah.
but
So
I mean,
at the DigiGov Expo last year in September, we gave away a pair of the Meta Ray-Bans for
yeah.
free to someone who attended day one and day two of the show. And I think we gave away the year before a pair of the Mark One Meta Ray-Bans. So for a couple of years, we've been giving away now, and they just keep getting better and better. So yeah, really exciting times.
Well, I love. I mean, I've done a few leadership programs, and it's when people put these on, and I could be speaking in 10 languages now if we were, talking. And it's just amazing what it can do. I can be looking at buildings. You can be doing all sorts. Whether or not we move to transcription and video is a big issue, and that's one of the ethical issues I think we need to address, because I think we do need. There are some elements where I think we need to discuss, and then the other one, of course, is robotics. Some of the robots that we're seeing coming out of China and the Americans, it's just incredible. And I just think about going back to my days when I was a care assistant and looking at the potential there for support and doing something. So I'm not suggesting there that robots would replace humans as care assistants. But there's lots of things I think that robots could do in a care home or in home care services where we can augment and we can support people in their own homes. So I just think, the list is endless. I can think about trading standards, environmental health, our planning departments, some of the things where, these systems can help our planners and, some of the things that the UK government's trying to do in terms of fast tracking things. We should be using AI, I think, to accelerate some of the areas.
Well, definitely. If I was going to push you for one thing, so let me take you back. So if you were to go back to your first day as a chief executive of Sefton Council, I think was it 2019?
It was, yeah.
With the knowledge that you have about AI and robotics now, if we had the same tech we do now, what would be the first thing that you change?
Oh, I would think that I certainly, without a doubt, I would want to use the workforce AI systems that we've got now, because just writing reports, using those systems for data, using some of those systems to help with the marketing and the comms teams, to help some of the back office services, and then supporting elected members and the politicians. Game changing. If only I'd had some of those systems. We were making £65 million worth of savings over 3 years, and having to cut back on services that none of the elected members really wanted, and of course citizens didn't want that, but austerity was there. But that would definitely be, I think, that using those would support the workforce, and it's supporting the workforce, improving outcomes for citizens, where I think AI is going to really see some changes. And I won't go on about some of the latest stuff around swarms and some of those new advances where AI systems can go into systems and they can start talking to each other. But these are the future areas that we need to debating. And one of the things that really does excite me is the UK government are constantly talking about how would they want to be at the forefront of this innovation. Some of the UK companies that we've got at the moment, they are really so advanced, and ICS.ai is up there at the forefront of a lot of these developments.
Yeah, definitely. Well, mentioned in Parliament not too long ago, and I think one of the largest AI suppliers to the public sector as well. So a real testament to the sector right now.
Yeah.
We spoke briefly earlier about ethics, and I guess how do you answer critics that worry that using AI in like social care assessments and with vulnerable and marginalised groups, that AI might introduce bias against these groups?
Yeah, well, I have to say, I might be one of those critics as well. So I think there are
Mm.
some, there's probably common ground there. I mean, I just kind of, well, can I just go back to the smart glasses here? We
Yep.
have to, I'll put them on once more. But you think about, going into somebody's home with those on at the moment. What we don't want to be too casual about some of these things where you go into a vulnerable person's home, or you're talking to a carer who needs that support. And you just say, I'd just like to switch these glasses on. Do you mind?
Mm.
There are some clear ethical issues here. We don't want to be casual about it. We do want
Yep.
to. We should be explaining to people, how the system's going to work. And if those people are saying, "Oh no, I do have concerns about some of these things," then we do need to be respectful of those areas. And then we've got to be upfront with citizens. We've got to be clear. We've got to be transparent. We've got to
Mm.
communicate to people that we are using artificial intelligence, and we've got to get permissions for these things. And if we
Yep.
haven't got permissions, we've got to make sure we don't do some of these things underhand. So there would be the things about that. But one of the things that certainly the ICS and the other companies that are using AI at the moment, we understand those issues, we understand those concerns, and of course, any system or product that we're trying to deliver and we're trying to innovate, they are in our DNA, and they are
Mm.
things we're always thinking about. And certainly from my perspective, working in local government for 40 years, and being trained as a social worker, being trained, and all the things that I did in local government, they are really important aspects that I think we've got to make sure that there aren't some of the biases that we've picked up and we've heard about in the media that are real,
Mm.
that don't come through in terms of AI. So lots of work to be done in that area, and we shouldn't just introduce a product just because it's exciting and it's going to change the world. And we've got to make sure that we do all of this robustly, properly. And there are existing laws. There's obviously the EU laws that we need to abide by, and and the other parts of regulation that are important.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess in some of those examples you mentioned in sort of social care, like people may fear that AI may make local councils feel almost cold and clinical, but I guess it could be the opposite in those examples you shared. Like it could actually make local authorities feel more human and sort of more responsive to the community. Have you got any thoughts on that? That sort of cold and clinical versus sort of warm and more engaging, more present.
Yeah, well, look, social workers at the end of the day, hard pressed social workers today, or even social workers, where they've had more time freed up because of either policies or funding or some changes in approach in transformation areas. They all want face to face contact with clients. So any artificial automation or processing or whatever it is that's there supporting them, that they know that I can spend at least, I don't know, 10 hours a week extra with clients this week because I know that the AI is going to do X, Y, and Z for me is really important. So they're the things I think where AI is going to really change the system, and that's what as humans, that's what humans want. That's what carers want. That's what people are in crisis want. They want that human approach, and I think having AI to support the workforce is really important. And then just going back to the robotics, as I was saying before, I think we can be using some of the robots in some of the early intervention and prevention areas. I think we
Mm.
could be using them in areas that where we can deploy them safely, and where we can, add some value to people. We can be using robots in terms of aids and adaptations. There are some aspects where robots can be used, I think, that I've seen in parts of America and in China, where we can at least start thinking about in the UK in the next 12, 18 months.
Well, I was going to ask actually, how many years off do you think we are from sort of deploying robots within our local authorities? But you think, yeah, a couple of years maybe.
Well, yeah. I mean, this goes back to, I think, to one of your earlier questions as well. I think in terms of where you are as a council, where you are as a chief executive, in terms of your thinking, do you want to be at the forefront? Do you want to be advancing some of these
Mm.
areas, or do you want to be, just see how it's being deployed, and then and I don't think there's any right or wrong answer there, by the way. And there's definitely no. I don't think there's any criticism of anyone who wants to be at the forefront, or anybody who wants to just wait and see what happens. But I will say this, looking at the robots that I've now seen in action working, in terms of customer services, front of house,
Mm.
the robots that are moving around, I think 3-6 months. I think
Wow.
we're off. Customer services in public buildings.
Yeah.
I think in terms of people's own homes, or in day centres, or some of the other, some of the other environments, I think we are probably talking the earliest. I think we can see some of these machines would be 12, 18 months, and maybe 12, maybe 2 years. But having seen the robots at front of house, I think 3 to 6 months.
Wow. I guess it comes down to the risk appetite of whoever's leading that AI initiative within the council. And I guess from your perspective, when you see an AI initiative succeed, who is it that's usually championing that within the organisation? Is it the chief executive, or is it the IT director, or is it someone else?
I think it's a mixture.
Yeah.
I've seen sometimes the first point of contact could be an IT manager or a director. It could be a particular department. It could be planning. It could be social care. But I have to say the areas and the councils that we've been working with, the most effective has usually been when the council's chief exec, the leader, and a lot of the elected members, with support from the trade unions, have to say as well,
Right.
where that buy-in has been there. And then I've used Bury as a great example. We always do an introduction first, where we will say to people, Joy, we're going to have a little webinar. We're going to tell you about why we're coming to your council to talk to
Mm.
you. They had hundreds of people coming along to the webinar just to hear
Wow.
more about how it works. So I think getting that workforce engagement, I think, is really important as well, because everybody wants to understand it. But answering your question specifically, I do think the leadership is really important to get that buy-in.
Yeah, I think for that buy-in, the engagement of the wider workforce is the biggest challenge, and I think from what you said is has been fairly easy, and they've been quite receptive of these AI tools, and across the board, not just in public sector, but wider than that, we see digital and AI skills as a common issue. How do you look to upskill that council workforce to be comfortable using AI in their daily routines?
Well, I think the very first thing we need to do is to demystify AI. I did reference that before, but I do think we've got to be able to go in and say to the staff, look, this is what AI is here to do.
Mm.
This is what it can do. And these are areas where it can support you, but we're not going to push anything on you. These are the areas that we want to talk to you about deploying. We want to talk through the interface with other systems. We want to talk about where they can be used publicly or where they are purely back office. So I think that's got to be the first phase with the staff. Then where it's been the most perspective, I have to say, with all of those councils that ICS work with, is where we've gone in and we haven't just left them. We've gone in and you might have introduced a new product or a new tool, and then you say, oh, well, give us a ring if there's any problems. It's where there's still a member of staff from the company that's still there. Because what we want to make sure that people do is, they might have gone on all the training courses, but then you forget, you get back into the office and you start doing your day job and you forget. But having somebody there on your shoulder, or just wandering around the office, or joining a Teams meeting if it's on Teams, and just reminding them that, oh, are you aware that you've got Workforce AI to support you with your daily life, and these are some of the things that it can do, and these are some of the products and some of the tools you've got. So I think that constant reminder of some of the tools and some of the benefits it can do. And then I think, there are some people who immediately take to AI, and you don't need a lot of training and support because they've had previous experience, or they just get it and they want to use it. But there are also other people there who we do know are going to take a little bit longer. They're going to need a little bit more hands holding. So I think there's a little bit more where you've just got to make sure that investment and those people don't get left behind. I think my biggest fear is it's those people who get left behind that, won't either keep pace, or potentially they're the people who are always going to be critical, and it's because they don't understand and they haven't been given the appropriate advice and guidance.
Do you think that's the biggest blocker to adoption within local councils, or is there something else?
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest blockers. I think certainly advice, support, training is from my experience has got to be up there. I think the other blockers, though, I would have said would have been the investment in the particular area. How much is an authority willing to invest in making sure that there is that support available. And then I think the other thing is the culture of the organisation. I think you've got to be an organisation that's prepared to listen, that's prepared to adapt, and that's prepared to work with its staff and with organisations to change. I think those organisations that don't want to change for whatever reason, and I'm sure there'll be good reasons for that. I think that they're going to be some of the blockages that potentially could be a little bit more tricky in terms of overcoming.
Yeah, I agree. Now, you mentioned all these tools. A lot has changed in the past, 5 years, if we were to cap it at that. So how would you define a future-proof council in 2026, and how does that compare to if I asked you 5 years ago?
Oh, without a doubt, workforce AI and digital assistants. I think if we spoke now and we rang any authorities, digital assistant, just listening to the quality of the response, the comprehensiveness of the response, that's the biggest change for me. And then the workforce AI product, all of those different systems and tools that are available there, the staff to help staff to promote some of the things, and then some of the recording and transcription, services, getting out to clients' homes and be able to use some of these systems is just great. And then I think if you look at some of the back office, some of the automation, the invoice processing, some of the, I've talked about freedom of information requests, some of these things where they take up a vast amount of staff time, having some of these tools is just phenomenal. So that's been a big change, I think. And then just tightening up, I think, on some of the AI policies and systems. I think that's added that extra layer of robustness, I think, for me.
Yeah. Are there any other use cases within local government that we haven't discussed?
Well, I think special education needs and disabilities SEND services.
Mm,
There are just some great tools available there in terms of helping people. When I think of the really important bit, if you're a parent or carer, is understanding that people have understood the comprehensive aspects of their daily life and some of the challenges that the child or the adult who's got SEND has. So I think those areas are really important. So from a workforce perspective, there's so much data and so much information out there. So I think having some of the SEND products around, supporting staff at the moment, distilling some of that information, making sure that the speech and language services, making sure that some of the other areas, in terms of social interaction, friends and friendships, housing, finance, all those elements, they're constantly thought about, and having that AI there to keep reminding staff that those are areas that are important. And then it's also about distilling that information and using that information, summarizing that information, remembering the human is in the loop, but just
mm,
having those tools available, I think for SEND are really good. And then if you just look at planning and housing and transport and the regeneration side, having some of those AI systems and tools to be able to support planning and look at new regeneration products, and to be able to do some of the work that for example, some of the survey work that needs to be done in terms of regeneration, and be able to within what hours, half a day,
mm.
do all that analysis of responses around those surveys, around local plans. It's just so important, and that has really changed, I think, a lot of those services. And then I just think in terms of income and data, revenue and benefits, and having some of those extra systems in place to support staff, I think has been really important. And a lot of authorities, using those AI systems, I think it's just phenomenal. So there's so many I could say, but they're
Mm.
the picky ones, I think, in terms of adult social care, children's services, homelessness, housing. These are real areas of pressure, I think, that
Yeah.
a lot of areas. The only other one I would say in terms of a qualitative area is public health. And I
Right.
think having some of the products available around housing, doing some of the synopsis of the research and the literature that's out there at the moment, I think they're really good products. Some of the AI systems that we've got now and that are available to staff, that we can really address things like poverty, making sure that health inequalities, we can start to be addressing some of those qualitative areas.
Yeah, it's such a broad scope of use cases. It really is. And we've spoken a lot about success and some of the success stories that you worked with in the public sector. I want to touch upon failure for a little bit if I can, because there's so much we could learn from that as well, and it's not necessarily always a bad thing. What does a failed AI pilot look like? Are there any red flags to look out for?
Well, yes, and I think that's a good question. I think the first thing is not, without a doubt, is not understanding why you're using AI, and also being thinking that AI is going to be the solution to all of your problems. It's
Mm,
not. It's there. It's harnessing. It's supportive, and it is innovative, and it does change approaches, etc. But they're the big flags for me. I think the other
mm,
area is just asking the questions about how does the AI work within the context of cybersecurity, and how does AI work in terms of engagement and the interface with citizens? And I think if those questions haven't been asked, then I think that's where it is gonna fail. I think the only other one that I would say that we just need to be alive to and careful of is, like anything, it doesn't have to be AI. We could have been talking about, some of the old CRM systems. It's just thinking about, well, yeah, there's lots of different products and systems out there. Some are real AI, some are approaching AI systems. How many of them are you going to have? And are you going to get into a position where you would really want to look at this from a unified perspective? So I think having a clear AI strategy is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess if a council leader was listening and wants to make a start on the AI journey tomorrow morning responsibly, what is the first step that you would recommend they take?
I think the first step is, what is your journey? And what is the journey that you want to be on? Is it in the context of a wider transformation program? So when you're looking at your buildings, you're looking at your citizens, your outcomes, you're looking at, which areas you're prioritizing for change. Where do you see AI sitting in that? That's the first thing. Then the second thing is, where if it's efficiencies and budget, I really genuinely believe that AI will realize benefits, and it will realize savings in terms of workforce, in terms of supporting the workforce. But you've got to look at this in the context of your human resources strategy. So I think you've got to look at it from that perspective. And then the third bit for a leader waking up in the morning in that is appetite. What is the appetite for change? Is this something that you really want to embrace? And do you think your organization has the leadership? And I'm talking here about member as much as officer leadership, but has it really got the leadership for it to go on that journey? And if it hasn't, that's fair enough. So how do you approach that? Who do you engage with? And what are the stepping stones to get to that stage? So they would be the three for me.
Yeah, you got to be ready for it. So finally, Dwayne, before I let you leave, if we future gaze in for a second, if you're looking down the road to 2030, I know we've already spoken about robotics in the next few years, but 2030, what is your ultimate vision for how a citizen will interact with their local council thanks to the integration of AI?
Well, I think if you're vulnerable, I think if you're in crisis, or you have real concerns, I still want humans to be at the forefront of supporting those individuals, but I want AI to be able to support those staff in some areas. However, I think where people require early intervention, prevention, where people want information quicker, they want speedier responses, they want information at their fingertips, they want advice, they want support, then I think AI has got a real position in the future of a council. And I think it is people. There's some onus on myself. There's onus on responsible leaders and chief executives and other directors in the country who need to be supportive of artificial intelligence. But I'd like to think that by 2030 we've got to that stage, and I'd like to think we're using robotics. Even if it's just front of house, we've got to that stage where those robots are engaging with us in council buildings, and where we're using some robotics. If it's not in clients' homes, in some of the systems and support premises that we have. To support individuals. So that would be where I'd like to see things change.
Well, it's exciting times, definitely, Dwayne, and it's been a pleasure having you on. I really enjoyed chatting to you, so thanks for spending the time. I really appreciate it. Where should people go if they want to keep up with the work you're doing?
Yeah, go straight to our website, ICS.ai, and I'm sure if it's not myself, we have dozens of technicians or sales team or marketing team who would be more than happy to have discussions. But I'm more than happy as well, as I do day in day out, to talk to anybody about AI. And we've got lots of conferences and workshops. We're at the Local Government Association conference. We're at the soccer team conference next month. So drop in and have a chat.
Yeah, is that the Soccer Team President's Conference?
It is, yeah, in the
Yeah.
port in London, and then it's the LGA conference in Bournemouth in July.
Yeah, very good. I've always heard good things about the President's Conference. Soccer Team are one of our key partners for DigiGov. So a little shout out to the President's Conference there. When this goes live, there will still be tickets available for the President's Conference. So do go and check that out. So yeah, thank you very much for your time, Dwayne, and yeah, speak soon.
No problem. Thanks.
Thank you.